Today we're going to talk about 3 simple tests that you can conduct to make sure that your compost pile is done. It's finished. Hi, this is Marion Owen in Kodiak, Alaska, and if I can make compost, you can too. I'll put a bunch of resources in the description below. Meanwhile, let's get started. Now, why is that important to know if your compost is done? Well, here's 2 reasons I can think of offhand. One is if you use unfinished compost in your seed starting mix, then chances are your seeds will not germinate. You'll actually prevent them from germinating, from sprouting in the first place. The second reason is because if you take unfinished compost that's still cooking and you incorporate it, you turn it into your soil in your raised beds, and you transplant seedlings in that soil, then you could also hurt or harm those tender seedlings. So what we're going to do today is start with the first tip, and that is, you'll notice that this cover on the compost pile that I put in here, the compost actually started at this height. And then over the 6-week period, as it broke down, the materials broke down, then this insulation here dropped down to about 1/3 to 1/2 of its original height. And so that's the first tip. The second tip, we're actually going to open up this compost and take a look inside. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is put my gloves on. Then we're going to dive into this compost pile, which is it's like Christmas to me. I love making compost. First we have, hanging on the thermometer, this is Compost Cowboy. Yay! I found him face down on a pile of kelp when I was collecting seaweed for the compost. Take him out of there, and then we'll take out the compost thermometer that I inserted in this foam insulation, and I just poke holes through it, and that way it can get way deep down into the compost pile, into the center of the compost pile. A compost thermometer is your best friend because it tells you exactly what's going on inside your pile. It'll tell you when to turn your compost. Without using a compost thermometer, it's kind of like vacuuming in the dark. I want to just say something about covering your compost pile. I highly recommend it. For one thing, it gives you an idea of how fast the materials are breaking down in your compost pile. It also preserves the heat, keeps the warmth in the pile, keeps the rain off the pile, and keeps the moisture from evaporating. So you don't lose moisture and you don't lose heat. You can use a carpet, a piece of plywood, and we just found this scrap piece of insulation foam. Pretty darn handy. Okay, so we talked about tip number 1, which is to check to see how much your compost pile has reduced, and that should be about 1/3 to 1/2 of its original volume. So tip number 2 is to take a handful of your compost and give it the sniff test. It should smell like a forest after a gentle rain. Just kind of an earthy smell. Not ammonia, just an earthy kind of smell. It's nice. The other thing is, take a handful of your compost, right? And give it a good look. It should be pretty homogeneous. That is, kind of all look the same. You shouldn't be able to recognize original ingredients like apple cores and chunks of stale bread, that type of thing. You might be able to still see crushed up eggshells or sticks, and that's fine. Eggshells take a little longer. The other thing is, your compost might look kind of chunky, not like the pictures you see in magazines and advertisements for tumblers and barrels. That's because what you see in those ads, nice, fluffy, beautiful compost, that's been sifted. So be very careful about what you actually see for advertisements in ads for compost tumblers and so on. What you're going to have in real life is kind of chunky stuff. And it'll be broken down, but it's not going to be beautiful powder that looks like topsoil. So buyer beware. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I'll put a bunch of resources in the description below. Meanwhile, keep your eyes on the stars and your hands in the dirt or your compost. Have a great day. Cheers.